we're basically part of the educational foundation within Zebia. We have a slightly different focus than Academy does, though, where Academy focuses on getting people who are established in the field up to a higher level. What we do is we hire more junior candidates, 1 to 3 years of experience, and employ them for 13 months. And during that time, we educate, we train people indeed to bridge the gap sort of between university and the practical knowledge that they need by giving a boot camp for a month and then having people work at a client for 12 months to hopefully also at the end of that move towards that client to work there permanently. One of the recent graduates from the boot camp is Pim, who was recently moved to KLM, and he'll share his experience in that move. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Matthijs. As a starter, I would like you to think about your first job after you graduated. How much of the skills that you learned in university were actually applicable and made you competent enough to do that job? And how big was the gap between the education you got and what you actually needed to know to do well in your job? Towards the end of my studies, I was a data scientist at 2 Amsterdam-based startups. And at both companies, I noticed that there is actually a big gap between the things you learn and the models you learn and what you actually need to know as a data scientist to do well. For example, how to write good code, how to write code that doesn't break, and how to make sure that if your code breaks, that it doesn't screw up the whole company. And for data scientists, most importantly, if you build a fancy model that works very well, how do you make sure that it actually can be used and it actually delivers value to the company? After my studies, I started with the bootcamp at Accelerated, which was 4 weeks of full-time training. And while I expected it to be mostly about learning new models, fancy deep learning stuff, it was actually more of a software engineering training about filling that gap between what you already know from a theoretical view to how to put that knowledge into action in a practical environment. So we learned about good coding practices, writing unit tests, but also about deploying the models using APIs and Docker, for example. After this bootcamp, I started at KLM. This is not actually me in the picture, but I would have liked to be that guy. And the first thing I noticed at KLM is there's a lot more areas that they do data scientists than I expected. I expected to be mostly pricing and marketing, but also, for example, in HR, finance, and in the engineering and maintenance departments. I started in the commercial team, and that's sort of an internal consultancy club that helps all passenger-facing teams within KLM. So for example, one thing we're currently working on is a destination recommender for, well, perhaps you guys. And me personally, I'm working on 3 projects at the moment. One is an API to anonymize the data sets that other teams are working on to comply to the GDPR regulations. Another one is a tool that analyzes the customer feedback on the website and in the mobile app to proactively act on the trending topics that customers mention. And finally, we're starting up an open source team internally, which, for example, works on a tool to make the flight-related, airport-related, and plane-related data available for all data scientists and data engineers within KLM. What I really like so far about KLM is the amount of trust they put in me. I can do a lot of work independently, and I think also the training that Matthijs gave us helps me a lot in that. Yeah, so far my experience is, as I mentioned, that there is a big gap between what you learn in university, the theoretical part, and what you actually need to know to do your job very well. So for, I don't know if there are any starting data scientists in the audience, but I would suggest you to proactively start also looking into software engineering, for example, by talking to data engineering colleagues. And for companies, I would suggest to be aware of this problem and make sure that starting data scientists are mentored or trained well. This is my experience so far as a starting data scientist, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you have about this experience or KLM or Accelerated.
You had that same experience that you come out of fresh out of university and you have to find a job, and there's a big gap between the theoretical knowledge that you have and the lack of practical experience. Who experienced that? Yeah, quite a lot of people, right? Does anyone have any questions for Pim right now? Hank, you just want to make me run, right?
So I think starting as a junior data science education, of course, for one part, so knowing your tools and knowing all the methodologies. And so what's your vision on how you land a junior data scientist? So how can you get someone up to speed on their jobs? So what's being done at KLM, for instance?
Yeah, I think so KLM is focusing a lot on hiring people via external companies that provide this training. So that's actually the only action they are taking that I'm aware of. Previously, they were only saying to people, hey, you can do a bunch of Coursera courses. But I think this structured training is a really good effort to get us up to speed.
Well, a sort of a mirror question. How do the KLM staff that were around already accept new, freshly trained data scientists?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, they trust, well, me a lot. I cannot speak for everyone, of course. And they're very open to suggestions, but also very helpful in things I don't know. There's obviously a lot of big corporate specific things about how to get started with using their internal structure of data, their data lake, for example, and they're very helpful in that. And they, yeah, as I said, they trust us, I think, a lot in doing what we think is best. And there's of course code reviews, so there is a mechanism to ensure that the quality is right, but yeah.
And Pim, you talked about things that were difficult and the gap between theoretical background and experience. Were there also things that you could bring to the KLM team?
That I could have brought before the training, or
when you started, were there things that, like a fresh perspective, or other things that gave new insights?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I only started a month ago, so it's not entirely clear, but one of the most important things that I see now is that the way they test their code is very limited. So they build unit tests for 1 or 2 test cases, and then they say, okay, it passes, so it's fine. And I think we need to be more thorough on that. And I had another example. Yeah, so the GDPR thing, I think there needs to be more seriousness in that. So we're also working on that with the team.
Yeah, that's awesome that within a month you're already able to establish such insights and help them to progress. Because often within a department also you have your custom way of working and you don't always look well to the outside. And then with a fresh pair of eyes you get to these new insights. That's great to hear as well.
Okay, so you said that before you started the training at Accelerated, you worked at 2 different startups, right? Mm-hmm. What is it that made you realize that you should take training? Why, from when you finished university, you would think that mostly in a startup setting, you will get the opportunity to learn and develop quickly and get a new skill set better than a corporate company. So what is it that made you think that, okay, it's time to invest in training? rather than going to another startup or maybe a company that is known to give trainings and try to develop within the company? What made you want to go outside of the company? Or a startup?
Yeah, for startups, that question is actually quite easy to answer because of the high speed that they have in developing new things. It's actually very limited what you can learn because you can only learn the things that are needed at that moment. So it's really demand based, and I think that's not a good way to ensure that you learn the whole basis. For bigger companies, I actually don't have an answer. For me, Accelerated was a nice combination of this structured training of a month in the beginning, and then learn at another at a bigger company to put it in practice. So yeah, I think what for me personally, it was the month of boot camp that got me here. Why I started here.
Yeah, great. Pim, thank you very much for sharing these insights.
thank you.
Let's give Pim a hand. And I'll release you from this horrible thing. Yes.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. So we get ready for our next speaker, which is Ron Reuter, who is a business development manager at. Sorry for that. Who is a business development manager at ING at the wholesale banking department. And he will talk about how to scale your enterprise advanced analytics activities. Here we are. Let me help you with this one.